Rich woman spits on single dad at funeral, then the lawyer opens the will, and every person in that room realizes the man she just humiliated now owns everything she thought was hers. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain fell in a steady, relentless drizzle over Savannah's prestigious Beaumont Cemetery, turning the perfectly manicured grass into a sodden, treacherous carpet that squelched beneath expensive Italian leather shoes. Gray clouds hung low and oppressive in the sky, as if the heavens themselves mourned the passing of Thomas Beaumont, one of Georgia's most influential real estate moguls. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth, creating an atmosphere that seemed to press down on the assembled mourners like a heavy blanket of grief. The marble casket stood at the center of it all, a monument to wealth and power adorned with pristine white roses that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. Its polished surface reflected the gray sky above, serving as a final testament to the fortune and influence of the man who now lay within. The cemetery itself spoke of old Southern money, towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss, elaborate headstones marking the resting places of Savannah's elite, and wrought iron gates that had stood sentinel for over a century. Near the back of the gathering, Eli Turner carefully adjusted his worn navy suit jacket, the fabric showing its age in the way it pulled slightly across his broad shoulders. The suit had been his wedding outfit 12 years ago, and though he'd kept it pressed and clean, no amount of care could hide the fact that it had seen better days. He made sure his 7-year-old daughter Lila was properly protected from the steadily falling rain under their shared umbrella. A simple black thing with a small tear near the wooden handle that he'd mended with electrical tape. It wasn't much to look at, but it served its purpose, keeping the worst of the weather off his little girl's head. In Lila's small, delicate hands, she carefully cradled a modest bunch of wildflowers they had picked together that morning from the field behind their trailer park. Purple violets and cheerful yellow dandelions created a humble bouquet that brought a touch of innocent, natural beauty to the overwhelmingly somber occasion. Her small fingers were stained green from the stems, and a few petals had already fallen, but she held them as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. "Daddy," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle patter of rain on their umbrella and the soft murmur of conversations around them. "Why are all these people wearing black? It makes everyone look so sad." Eli squeezed her small hand gently, feeling the warmth of her tiny fingers through his calloused palm. "It's to show respect, sweetheart. Remember how we talked about Mr. Beaumont on the way here? How he helped Daddy when he was a soldier far away?" Lila nodded solemnly, her golden pigtails bobbing beneath the protective dome of their umbrella. "You said he was a hero, like the ones in my books." "That's right, baby girl." Eli's throat tightened with emotion as the memories came flooding back. That scorching day in Afghanistan when Thomas Beaumont, then a visiting civilian contractor with kind eyes and steady hands, had pulled him to safety during a deadly ambush that could have ended everything. Some memories never fade, no matter how many years pass or how hard you try to bury them beneath the routine of everyday life. An impressive fleet of gleaming black luxury cars began pulling up to the ornate cemetery gates, their polished surfaces reflecting the gray sky despite the rain. Mercedes, BMWs, and Bentleys formed a procession that spoke of wealth beyond most people's imagination. The assembled mourners, a sea of expensive black clothing, designer handbags, and jewelry that caught what little light filtered through the clouds, began to part like a dark ocean, creating a respectful path for the arrival of the Beaumont family. Catherine Beaumont emerged from the lead car with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime commanding attention and respect. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed beneath an elegant black silk hat adorned with a delicate veil that softened her angular features without hiding the steel in her gray eyes. Her spine was straight as a military rod, her grief carefully masked behind a facade of rigid, uncompromising dignity that had been armor against the world for more years than she cared to count. Even in mourning, she carried herself like the Southern aristocrat she was, every movement calculated, every expression controlled. "That's his daughter," someone whispered nearby, the words carrying on the humid air. They say she hadn't spoken to him in over 15 years. Heard she never forgave him for leaving her mother, another voice added with the relish that comes from knowing someone else's private pain. Called it the scandal of the decade when he took up with that waitress. Eli shifted uncomfortably, trying to make himself smaller, to blend into the background of expensive suits and designer dresses. He hadn't come here seeking attention or recognition. only to pay his respects to the man who'd given him a second chance at life when he'd needed it most. The whispers and curious glances made his skin crawl, but he stayed put, determined to see this through for Thomas's sake. The murmurs grew louder as more people began to notice Eli and Lila standing among the sea of Savannah's social elite. Their presence was like a pebble in a polished shoe, impossible to ignore and increasingly uncomfortable for those who prided themselves on exclusivity. "Who's that man in the back?" "Never seen him at any of the charity galas or social functions." "Look at that suit. Must be off the rack from some department or store." "What's a man like that doing at Thomas Beaumont's funeral?" Catherine's perfectly coiffed head turned sharply at the rising murmurs, her trained social antennae picking up the disturbance in her father's carefully orchestrated final farewell. Her gray eyes scanned the crowd with the precision of a hawk until they landed squarely on Eli and Lila. Her perfectly painted lips, the color of dried roses, thinned into a harsh, disapproving line as she processed what she saw: a working-class man in an obviously old suit, accompanied by a small child clutching weeds as if they belonged at her father's funeral. Without hesitation, Catherine strode toward them, her designer heels sinking slightly into the wet grass with each determined step. The crowd parted before her like subjects before a queen, sensing the storm that was about to break. "This is a private service," she announced, her voice cutting through the sound of rain like shards of ice. Every word was precisely enunciated in the cultured tones of old Southern money. "Press representatives aren't allowed on these grounds, and we certainly don't need any opportunists trying to make a spectacle of my father's funeral." Eli stood his ground, keeping his voice gentle and respectful despite the obvious hostility radiating from the woman before him. "Ma'am, I'm not with any newspaper. I knew your father." "Knew him?" Catherine's laugh was sharp and brittle, like crystal breaking. "I've been part of Savannah society my entire life, and I've never seen you at any function, any gathering, any place where civilized people meet. You honestly expect me to believe you knew Thomas Beaumont?" More people were turning to watch now, drawn by the unfolding drama like moths to a flame. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as the city's social elite focused their attention on the confrontation. Lila pressed closer to her father's side, instinctively sensing the hostility in the air. The wildflowers trembled in her small hands as she looked up at the angry woman with wide, frightened eyes. "Your father saved my life in Afghanistan, ma'am," Eli said quietly, his voice steady despite the growing audience. "I just wanted to pay my respects and say goodbye to a good man who—" "How dare you?" Catherine's voice rose to a pitch that carried across the entire cemetery, causing even the minister to pause in his preparations. "Coming here with some fabricated story, bringing a child as a prop to gain sympathy." Her eyes raked over his modest clothing with undisguised contempt, taking in every detail that marked him as beneath her social station. "My father was a gentleman of distinction. He would never associate with someone like you." "Mrs. Beaumont?" Eli started again, desperation creeping into his voice as he tried to defuse the situation for his daughter's sake. "I mean no disrespect to you or your father's memory. I only wanted—" But Catherine had reached her breaking point. 20 years of grief and pride and unresolved anger merging into a terrible, perfect storm of cruelty. The loss of her father, the memories of abandonment, the shame of being left behind, it all focused on this man who dared to claim a connection to the father who had chosen strangers over his own flesh and blood. She stepped forward, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume, and spat with deliberate, calculated precision. The gesture was as shocking as it was degrading, landing on Eli's shirt like a mark of shame. "You're a disgrace and a liar," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Security, remove this man and his child from the premises immediately. How dare they contaminate my father's funeral with their presence?" The effect on little Lila was instantaneous and heartbreaking. She burst into tears, the carefully gathered wildflowers dropping from her trembling hands onto the wet grass where they were immediately forgotten. She clutched her father's hand with both of hers, her small body shaking with sobs of confusion and hurt that she was too young to understand, but old enough to feel deeply. The entire crowd fell into stunned silence, shocked by the raw display of cruelty they had just witnessed. Even among Savannah's elite, where social warfare was an art form, Catherine's actions crossed a line that left everyone uncomfortable. The rain seemed to pause in its falling, suspended in the heavy moment of tension like the breath of God himself holding back in shock. The only sounds that broke the terrible quiet were Lila's heartbroken crying and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the Georgia sky, as if heaven itself was holding its breath at the scene of human cruelty unfolding in the sacred ground below. The old Beaumont mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its white columns and wraparound porches a testament to Southern grandeur. Inside the drawing room, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over antique furniture and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Catherine Beaumont stood by the marble fireplace, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal snifter of brandy. Her earlier composure had cracked, revealing the trembling anger underneath. She took another sip, watching the room fill with relatives and acquaintances who had followed from the cemetery. "This is preposterous," she muttered, loud enough for nearby cousins to hear. "That man doesn't belong here, in my father's home." Eli Turner sat in a worn leather armchair near the corner, his daughter Lila curled up on his lap. Her eyes were still red from crying, and she pressed her face against his chest whenever someone looked their way. He stroked her hair gently, whispering soft words of comfort. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll go home soon." Victor Beaumont, Catherine's cousin, lounged on an expensive sofa across the room. His carefully tailored suit and gold watch spoke of wealth, but there was something sharp and hungry in his eyes as he watched Eli. Well, Victor drawled, swirling his drink. "If it isn't our mysterious guest of honor, tell me, what exactly did you do to convince old Thomas to invite you to his funeral? Polish his shoes? Wash his car?" Eli didn't respond, just held Lila closer as she tensed at the man's mocking tone. Mr. Harold Green cleared his throat from the doorway. The family lawyer was a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair at his temples. He carried a leather briefcase that looked as old and dignified as the house itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "if you'll all take your seats, we can begin the reading of Mr. Thomas Beaumont's last will and testament." The room rustled with movement as people found their places. Catherine remained by the fireplace, gripping her brandy like a shield. Victor straightened his tie and leaned forward, a predatory smile playing at his lips. Mr. Green settled behind Thomas's old mahogany desk, laying out several documents with careful precision. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room, his expression neutral but his eyes keen. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to note that this will was revised and properly executed just 3 months ago, with Mr. Beaumont of sound mind and in the presence of 2 witnesses." Catherine's fingers tightened around her glass. "Get on with it, Harold." The lawyer nodded and began to read. "I, Thomas James Beaumont, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The usual legal language followed: revocation of prior wills, appointment of executors. Catherine took another drink, her face growing more rigid with each paragraph. Victor's smile began to fade as the reading continued without mention of his name. Then Mr. Green paused, adjusting his glasses again before continuing in a clear, steady voice. "To my daughter Catherine, I leave my deepest regrets for the years we lost, and my fervent hope that she will find it in her heart to understand the choices I have made." Catherine's hand began to shake. Whispers rippled through the room. "As for my earthly possessions," Mr. Green continued, "including the Beaumont estate, all associated lands, business holdings, and financial assets, I hereby bequeath them in their entirety to Eli Turner, a man who showed me the true meaning of honor, sacrifice, and humility." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Victor shot to his feet, his face flushed red. "This is impossible!" Mr. Green raised his voice slightly to be heard over the commotion. "Mr. Turner's inheritance is conditional upon his residing in the Beaumont mansion for a period of no less than 6 months, during which time he will learn the management of the estate and its associated responsibilities." Eli sat perfectly still, his face pale with shock. Lila looked up at him with worried eyes, sensing the tension in the room. Catherine stood frozen by the fireplace, her elegant frame rigid with disbelief. The crystal snifter slipped from her fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. Brandy and broken glass spread across the polished surface in a glittering pool. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the suddenly silent room. Everyone stared at either Catherine or Eli, waiting for someone to speak, to explain, to make sense of this unexpected turn of events. Lila's small voice broke the silence, trembling as she whispered against her father's chest, "Daddy, Did we do something bad? Thunder cracked outside the Beaumont mansion's windows as rain pelted against the glass. Catherine's heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floor as she advanced toward Mr. Green, her face flushed with anger and brandy. "This is preposterous," she demanded, jabbing a finger toward the lawyer. "My father would never leave everything to a stranger." Her voice cracked on the last word. Eli Turner sat quietly in a worn armchair, his daughter Lila curled against his chest. His calloused hands stroked her hair soothingly as she hiccuped from her earlier tears. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room, "I want no part of this inheritance. I came here today only to pay my respects to your father. He was a good man." "A good man?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "You didn't know him at all." "Mr.?" Green cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Actually, Miss Beaumont, your father and Mr. Turner shared quite a history." He pulled out a leather-bound journal from his briefcase. "Perhaps this will explain things." Catherine's cousin Victor snorted from his corner. "What? Did dear old Uncle Thomas write his confession in his diary?" "In a manner of speaking," Mr. Green replied, opening the journal to a marked page. "This entry is dated 12 years ago, during Mr. Beaumont's business trip to Afghanistan." The lawyer began to read, "Today I owe my life to a stranger. Our convoy was attacked outside Kandahar. When the dust cleared, a medic named Turner pulled me from the wreckage. He didn't know who I was, didn't care about my wealth or status. He simply saw a human being in need." Eli's eyes closed at the memory, his arms tightening around Lila. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Mr. Green continued reading. "In the field hospital, Turner stayed by my side, even though his shift had ended. He showed me pictures of his pregnant wife back home, shared his water when supplies ran low. I saw in him the man I wish I had been, someone who valued people over pride, love over money." Catherine's hand trembled as she set down her empty glass. "That doesn't explain why he's here now, why father would." She trailed off, struggling to maintain her composure. "Your father kept track of Eli over the years," Mr. Green explained gently. "When Eli's wife died of cancer, leaving him alone with baby Lila, your father anonymously helped cover the medical bills. When Eli needed work after leaving the service, Thomas made sure his construction company had an opening. So he manipulated his way into my father's good graces." Catherine spat, but her voice held less conviction now. Eli stood up, Lila still in his arms. "Miss Beaumont, I never knew any of this. I didn't know your father was behind the help I received. I worked hard for everything I have, ma'am. I don't want your money or this house." "Nevertheless," Mr. Green interjected, pulling out another document, "the will is quite specific. Mr. Turner must reside in the Beaumont mansion for a period of 6 months to claim his inheritance. If he refuses, the entire estate will be liquidated and donated to various veterans' charities." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the shocked faces in the room. Catherine's cousin Victor cursed under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. "6 months?" Eli asked, looking around the opulent room with obvious discomfort. "Sir, I have a job, a home. Your current position at the construction company would be held for you," Mr. Green assured him. "As for your home, the trailer park's lease terms are month to month. These arrangements were all considered in advance." Catherine's perfectly painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "So the choice is stay here or deprive deserving veterans of help. How convenient." She moved closer to Eli, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Very well, Mr. Turner. Accept my father's generosity. Move into our home. But know this, I'm not leaving. This is my house, my legacy, and I will make every day of those 6 months a reminder of exactly where you belong." Lila whimpered slightly at Catherine's tone, pressing her face into her father's neck. Eli's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "I understand, Miss Beaumont, and I accept. Not for the money, but because your father's last wish deserves respect." The storm raged on outside as Catherine turned away, her elegant figure rigid with fury. "Welcome to Beaumont Manor, Mr. Turner," she said without looking back. "I do hope you survive the stay." The evening sky had turned a deep purple when Eli's old pickup truck rumbled through the iron gates of the Beaumont estate. Lila pressed her face against the passenger window, her eyes wide as saucers at the sight of the towering Georgian mansion with its white columns and wraparound veranda. "It's like a castle, Daddy. she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Eli's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The gravel driveway crunched under his tires as he parked behind a row of expensive cars. Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? This is just temporary. We're here because Mr. Beaumont asked us to be. Martha Jennings stood waiting at the front door, her gray hair neatly pinned back, wearing a simple black dress. Her kind face broke into a warm smile as Eli helped Lila from the truck. "Welcome home," she said, extending her hands to them both. "Thank you, ma'am," Eli replied, shouldering their 2 worn duffel bags. He'd packed light, some clothes, Lila's stuffed rabbit, and a few precious photos. The grand foyer took Lila's breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow spots on marble floors, and a sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor. "Look at all the sparkly lights, Daddy." "Careful now," Eli cautioned as Lila spun around, her Mary Janes clicking on the floor. "We don't want to break anything." "The east wing will be yours," Martha explained, leading them past oil paintings and antique furniture. "Miss Catherine has requested you restrict yourselves to the absolute minimum space required." Catherine's voice cut through the air like ice. She stood at the top of the stairs, still in her funeral clothes. "The library, music room, and west wing are off limits. The main parlor is for entertaining guests only. You may take your meals in the kitchen." Eli nodded quietly. "We understand, Miss Beaumont." "We'll keep to ourselves." "See that you do." Catherine's heels clicked away, the sound echoing through the vast space. Martha shook her head sadly. "Don't mind her. She's hurting something fierce right now." She led them down a hallway lined with leather-bound books. This was Mr. Thomas's private study. "It's yours now, Eli." The room smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. Dark wooden shelves reached to the ceiling, and a massive desk dominated one wall. A leather armchair sat by the fireplace, well-worn from years of use. "Oh no, I couldn't," Eli started to protest. "Your place is earned here," Martha said firmly, patting his arm. "Thomas wanted you to have this space. He told me so himself." Lila wandered to the desk, running her small fingers over the smooth wood. "Was this where the nice man worked, Miss Martha?" "Indeed it was, child." Martha's eyes crinkled with affection. "And please, just Martha will do." They continued the tour, finding their bedrooms upstairs. Lila's room was bigger than their entire trailer, with a canopy bed and pink wallpaper. She bounced on the mattress, giggling. "It's so soft." "Like sleeping on clouds," Martha agreed. She helped Eli unpack Lila's few belongings, tutting at how little they had. "We'll need to do something about this," she murmured. Eli's room connected to Lila's through a Jack and Jill bathroom. It was equally grand, with a 4-poster bed and heavy drapes. He set his duffel bag down, feeling out of place among the fine furnishings. Thunder rumbled outside as Martha showed them the kitchen. "Help yourselves to anything you need. I keep it well stocked." She pointed out the pantry, the informal dining area, and the back stairs that led to the service areas. Later that night, after a simple dinner of sandwiches, Eli tucked Lila into her new bed. "Comfy, sweetheart?" "It's different," she said, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "But nice. Do you think Mommy would have liked it here?" Eli's throat tightened. "I think she would have loved it, especially seeing you in this pretty room." He smoothed her hair back and kissed her forehead. "Say your prayers?" "Dear God," Lila began, folding her hands. "Thank you for this nice house, and Miss Martha. Please help Miss Catherine not be so sad and angry. And please watch over Mommy in heaven. Amen." "Amen," Eli echoed softly. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room. "Sleep tight, princess." Up on her private balcony, Catherine stood in her silk robe, immune to the approaching storm. She held an old photograph in trembling hands, Thomas Beaumont in his younger days, smiling broadly with his arm around a teenage Catherine at her debutante ball. "You betrayed me again," she whispered, her words lost in the wind. A tear fell onto the photograph, blurring the image of happier times. Morning light pierced through the lingering storm clouds, casting golden rays across the Beaumont mansion's polished floors. The grand kitchen, with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances, felt foreign to Eli as he searched through unfamiliar cabinets for a simple frying pan. Lila sat at the kitchen island, swinging her legs on a tall stool, her purple pajamas dotted with cartoon unicorns. "Can we have bacon, Daddy? Like we do at home?" "Of course, sweetheart." Eli smiled, finally locating what he needed. The kitchen might be fancy, but cooking was cooking, no matter where you did it. The sizzle of bacon filled the air just as Catherine swept into the kitchen, already dressed in a tailored navy suit. She wrinkled her nose. "Must you make such a common breakfast? The smell will linger for hours." "Good morning, Miss Beaumont," Eli said quietly, flipping the bacon. "Would you care for some?" "I prefer my breakfast civilized," she replied, moving to the coffee maker. "Martha usually prepares my grapefruit and toast." "Martha's not feeling well this morning," Eli explained. "She mentioned having a migraine when I saw her earlier." Catherine's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. "And how exactly did you see Martha earlier?" "I always wake up at dawn, ma'am. Military habit." Eli placed a plate of bacon in front of Lila, who beamed. "Would you like me to make you some toast?" "I'm perfectly capable," Catherine began, but stopped as Lila slid off her stool and approached her. "Would you like to sit with us, miss?" "Beaumont, Daddy makes the best scrambled eggs, too." The little girl's smile was genuine, her eyes hopeful. Something flickered across Catherine's face. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of softening, before her usual mask slipped back into place. "Very well. Toast. Dry." Eli nodded and reached for the bread while Lila climbed back onto her stool, humming a cheerful tune. The kitchen settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the soft clink of silverware and the pop of the toaster. Catherine sipped her coffee, watching over the rim as Lila carefully poured herself a glass of orange juice from a crystal pitcher. The girl's small hands trembled slightly with the weight of it. "Careful with that," Catherine warned sharply. "That crystal is over 100 years. The warning came too late." Lila's hand slipped, and the pitcher crashed against a delicate china teacup. The cup toppled off the counter, shattering on the floor in a spray of white porcelain and orange juice. "I'm sorry," Lila gasped, tears immediately welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean to." Catherine shot up from her seat, face flushed with anger. "That cup was part of my grandmother's collection. Do you have any idea what you've done? This is exactly why children shouldn't handle fine things. You clearly haven't been taught proper." "That's enough." Eli's voice, though quiet, cut through Catherine's tirade like a knife through butter. He moved to stand beside his daughter, one hand gentle on her shoulder. "It was an accident, and she apologized. I'll replace the cup." "Replace it?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "That cup was an antique. You can't simply replace family heirlooms with something from a department store." Eli met her gaze steadily. "You're right, we can't replace the cup. But we can choose how we respond to accidents, especially when they involve children who are trying their best." His voice remained calm, his posture relaxed but protective of Lila, who had buried her face in his side. Catherine opened her mouth to argue, but something in Eli's expression made her pause. His eyes held no anger, no defensiveness, only a patient understanding that seemed to reach right through her fury and touch something deeper. "I'll clean this up," he said softly. "Lila, honey, go finish your breakfast at the table, away from the broken pieces." Lila nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand as she carefully made her way around the mess. To everyone's surprise, she stopped in front of Catherine. "I really am sorry about your grandmother's cup, Miss Beaumont. I'll be more careful next time." Catherine's shoulders stiffened, then slowly relaxed. Without another word, she turned and left the kitchen, her toast forgotten on the counter. After breakfast, Eli found himself in the overgrown garden behind the mansion. Years of neglect had left the once manicured space wild and unkempt. Without thinking, he began pulling weeds from around what looked like they had once been rose bushes. The work was familiar, comfortable. He'd always found peace in tending to growing things, even back in his small trailer's patch of yard. His hands moved automatically, clearing debris, straightening bent stems, giving the plants room to breathe. From her second-floor study, Catherine watched through the window as Eli worked in the garden. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair as he bent to his task, his movements careful and deliberate. Despite herself, she found her anger from the breakfast incident fading as she observed his quiet industry. "He's too good for his own good," she muttered, turning away from the window. But her words lacked their usual bite, and she couldn't quite shake the image of his patient eyes during their confrontation in the kitchen. The early morning light filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Catherine Beaumont paused at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on the mahogany banister. From below, she heard a small voice coming from the library. "And please help the sad lady upstairs." Lila's sweet voice carried through the quiet house. "Daddy says we should pray for people who are hurting, even if they don't like us very much." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She moved closer to the library entrance, staying just out of sight. "And maybe you could help her smile more?" Lila continued, her hands clasped together as she knelt by the leather armchair. "Because everyone needs to smile sometimes, right? Even if they're mad about Daddy being here." Eli's gentle voice joined in. "Amen. That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart." Catherine backed away, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She retreated to her father's old study, which she'd forbidden anyone else to enter. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the heavy oak door. The room smelled of leather and old books, just as it always had. Catherine's eyes were drawn to the bottom drawer of his desk, where she knew he kept personal items. She hesitated before pulling it open. There, beneath a stack of papers, lay a worn leather photo album she hadn't seen in years. Catherine settled into her father's chair and opened it carefully. The first page showed her parents on their wedding day. Her mother, radiant in white lace, smiled up at Thomas Beaumont with such trust and love that Catherine's vision blurred. She touched her mother's face in the photograph. "You promised to love her forever?" Catherine whispered, her voice breaking. "You promised us both." She turned the pages slowly, watching herself grow from a toddler to a young girl. In every picture, her father's eyes shone with pride. Until suddenly, the pictures stopped. The remaining pages were blank, just like their relationship had become after he left. A tear splashed onto the protective plastic covering the photos, then another. Catherine's shoulders shook as she finally allowed herself to cry, truly cry, for the first time since her father's death. "Are you okay?" The small voice made Catherine jump. She quickly wiped her eyes, but not before Lila had seen her tears. The little girl stood in the doorway, holding something yellow in her hand. "You're not supposed to be in here," Catherine said, but her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. Lila stepped forward anyway, her brown eyes full of concern. "I picked this for you." She held out a slightly crushed dandelion. "Flowers make people happy. That's what my mommy used to say before she went to heaven." Catherine stared at the simple weed flower, its yellow petals bright against Lila's small palm. Something about the child's innocent gesture, combined with the mention of her deceased mother, made Catherine's throat tight. "I'm allergic," she lied, turning away. "You should go now." "Oh." Lila's face fell, but she carefully placed the dandelion on the corner of the desk. "Maybe you could just look at it then. Sometimes that works too." Before Catherine could respond, Lila had skipped away, leaving behind only the sound of her footsteps and the sunny yellow flower on the dark wood desk. Catherine sat there for a long time, looking between the old photographs and the dandelion. Finally, she stood up and walked to the kitchen, where Martha was preparing lunch. "Martha, do we have any small vases?" Catherine asked, trying to sound casual. The housekeeper raised her eyebrows, but nodded toward a cabinet. "The crystal bud vases are in there, Miss Catherine." Catherine selected the smallest one, filled it with water, and returned to the study. With careful fingers, she picked up the dandelion and placed it in the vase, adjusting it until it stood straight and proud. Later that evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Eli passed by the study while doing his nightly check of the house's locks. Through the partially open door, his eyes caught sight of something that made him pause. There on Catherine's desk, next to the photo album she'd left open, stood a tiny crystal vase holding a single dandelion, the same one his daughter had picked that morning. A small smile crossed his face as he continued down the hall, leaving Catherine's quiet gesture of acceptance undisturbed. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the sleeping mansion. Eli Turner stood in Thomas Beaumont's study, unable to sleep. The room smelled of leather-bound books and aged wood, a sanctuary of memories frozen in time. Moonlight spilled through the bay windows, illuminating the massive oak desk where Thomas had spent countless hours. Family photos lined the walls, most of them recent, Eli noticed. None showed Catherine as a child. He ran his fingers along the spines of books on the shelves, stopping at a collection of leather-bound volumes that looked different from the others. They weren't printed books at all, but journals, each dated and worn from frequent handling. Eli hesitated. These were private thoughts, not meant for his eyes. But something about their placement, right at eye level, easily accessible, made him wonder if Thomas had wanted them to be found. He carefully pulled out the earliest journal and opened it. The handwriting was sharp and precise, though the ink had faded slightly with time. "The 15th of September, 1985, Eli read softly. "I made the biggest mistake of my life today. I walked away from my little girl. Catherine's face when I left, I'll never forget those eyes. Helen begged me to stay, but my pride. Eli's throat tightened. He turned another page, then another, reading Thomas's private confessions. The words spoke of a man tortured by his choices, of countless attempts to reach out to his daughter that went unanswered. I deserve her hatred, one entry read, but I keep trying. Every birthday card returned, every Christmas gift sent back. My little girl grew up without me, and it's my own damn fault. Lost in the raw emotion of Thomas's words, Eli didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching. The study door flew open, flooding the room with harsh light from the hallway. "What do you think you're doing?" Catherine's voice cut through the silence like ice. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in an elegant silk robe, her face twisted with fury. Eli closed the journal carefully. "I couldn't sleep. I was just what? Digging through my father's private things? Looking for more ammunition to use against me?" She stalked into the room, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. "That's not what this is," Eli said quietly, maintaining his composure despite her anger. "Then what is it? Another attempt to prove how worthy you are of his love? The love he denied his own daughter?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Eli looked at the journal in his hands, then back at Catherine. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, though her posture remained rigid with anger. "These aren't my stories to read," he said softly. He held out the journal. "But maybe they're yours." Catherine stared at the offered book as if it might burn her. "What?" "Your father wrote about you." "A lot." Eli stepped forward, still holding out the journal. "Maybe this is something you were meant to read, not me." "How dare you?" she started, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Her hand moved unconsciously toward the journal. "I'll leave you alone," Eli said. He placed the journal gently on the desk between them. "Whatever's in these pages, it mattered enough to him to write it down. That has to mean something." Catherine didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the leather-bound book. As Eli walked past her toward the door, he noticed her hands were shaking. He closed the door quietly behind him, leaving Catherine alone in the study. Through the thick wood, he heard the soft scrape of a chair being pulled out, followed by the whisper of pages being turned. In the stillness of the sleeping house, Catherine Beaumont sat at her father's desk, her trembling fingers opening the first journal to read the words her father had left behind. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the marble countertops. Eli stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Lila set the table with careful precision, her tongue poking out in concentration as she aligned each fork perfectly. The click of heels on hardwood made them both look up. Catherine stood in the doorway, her posture rigid but lacking its usual hostility. She wore a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than Eli's monthly salary. Her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. "Good morning," she said, her voice measured. Her eyes met Eli's briefly. "Thank you. For the journals, I mean." Eli nodded, keeping his movements steady as he slid another pancake onto the growing stack. "You're welcome." Lila bounced on her toes, her face lighting up. "Miss Catherine, are you having breakfast with us today?" A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed Catherine's face. "I suppose I could. And then maybe you could help us make cookies." Lila continued, her enthusiasm bubbling over. "Daddy and I are baking for the church fundraiser. Martha said we could use the kitchen." Catherine's eyebrows arched. "Baking? I haven't." She paused, then added softly, "I haven't baked anything since I was a girl. Please?" Lila clasped her hands together. "I'll show you how. Daddy says I'm the best at measuring ingredients." Eli watched the internal struggle play across Catherine's features. The proud socialite warring with something deeper, something that had been awakened by her father's written words. "Very well," Catherine said finally, "but only because the church needs help." They settled into an unexpectedly peaceful breakfast. Catherine picked delicately at her pancakes, while Lila chatted about her plans for the cookies. Eli noticed Catherine hiding small smiles behind her coffee cup at his daughter's animated descriptions. After breakfast, Lila took charge of the cookie operation with all the authority a 7-year-old could muster. She assigned Catherine to measuring flour while Eli creamed butter and sugar in the mixer. "No, Miss Catherine," Lila giggled. "You have to level it off with your finger, like this." She demonstrated with the measuring cup, dragging her small finger across the top to create a perfect measure of flour. Catherine mimicked the action, her manicured nail leaving precise trails in the white powder. "Like this? Perfect," Lila beamed. "Now put it in the bowl. Careful." But Catherine's careful pour was interrupted by Lila's enthusiastic bump, sending a cloud of flour into the air. It settled like snow across Catherine's expensive dress, dusting her hair with white powder. For a moment, everyone froze. Eli tensed, preparing for an outburst. But then something remarkable happened. Catherine looked down at her flour-covered self, touched her powdered hair, and laughed. It started as a small chuckle but grew into a genuine laugh that lit up her entire face. Years seemed to fall away as she stood there, covered in flour, finally letting go of her rigid control. "Oh my," she managed between laughs, "I look absolutely ridiculous." Lila joined in the laughter, and even Eli couldn't help but smile, the kitchen filled with the warm sound of their shared amusement. They spent the next hour shaping cookies, with Lila insisting that some be decorated with extra sprinkles, because sad people need extra sparkles. Catherine's technique improved with each batch, and soon she was creating perfectly shaped hearts and stars alongside Lila's more creative interpretations. As the last batch came out of the oven, Martha appeared with a tea tray. "Why don't you all take these by the fire?" she suggested, her eyes twinkling at the sight of flour-covered Catherine. "It's gotten quite chilly today." They settled in the living room, where a fire crackled softly in the grand fireplace. Lila passed around still warm cookies while Martha poured tea into delicate cups. Catherine sat in her usual armchair, but her posture was different now, more relaxed, more natural. As she bit into a cookie, a genuine smile spread across her face, the first real one Eli had seen since arriving at the mansion. Eli noticed it quietly, watching how the firelight softened her features, how the remnants of flour in her hair caught the golden glow. For a moment, he glimpsed the young girl she must have been, before life and hurt had built her walls so high. The afternoon's peace didn't last. Dark clouds rolled in from the coast, bringing with them the kind of storm that made Savannah's old houses creak and groan. By evening, the wind howled through the mansion's eaves, and rain lashed against the windows like thrown pebbles. Eli had just finished tucking Lila into bed, reading her extra stories until she fell asleep despite the thunder, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The mansion plunged into darkness. He waited a moment for his eyes to adjust, then felt his way along the hallway wall. A crash and a muttered curse from downstairs caught his attention. Following the sound, he made his way down the grand staircase, moving carefully in the darkness. In the sitting room, he found Catherine fumbling with a box of matches, surrounded by several expensive-looking candles. Her usually perfect hair had started to come loose, and frustration was evident in every movement as she struck match after match, only to have them go out before reaching the wicks. "Here, let me help," Eli offered quietly, not wanting to startle her. Catherine stiffened but didn't object when he took the matches. His steady hands made quick work of lighting several candles, their warm glow creating dancing shadows on the walls. "I suppose I should thank you," Catherine said, smoothing her hair back into place, "though I was managing just fine." "Of course you were." Eli's voice held no sarcasm, just simple agreement. He placed candles strategically around the room, creating pools of light in the darkness. Thunder crashed overhead, making the windows rattle. Catherine jumped slightly, then tried to cover it by adjusting her sleeve. "Well, I suppose we're stuck here until the power returns." "Seems so." Eli settled into one of the armchairs, the leather creaking softly beneath him. "Though it reminds me of nights in Afghanistan, sitting with nothing but stars and stories to pass the time." Catherine hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite him. "You served with my father there?" For a while, Eli's eyes grew distant in the candlelight. "That's where he saved my life. But it was years later when he truly helped me, after Anna passed." "Anna?" The name hung in the air between them. "My wife." Eli's voice softened. "She was a nurse at Memorial Hospital. That's where she met your father when he was getting treatment. She had this way of making every patient feel like they were her only concern in the world." Catherine leaned forward slightly, her usual mask of indifference slipping. "I didn't know he was treated at Memorial. 2 years ago, Anna was already sick herself then, but she never let it show while she was working." Eli smiled sadly. "When she passed, I was lost. Had a 7-year-old daughter and couldn't seem to find my footing. Your father showed up one day, said he needed help managing some of his properties, offered me a job that let me keep flexible hours for Lila." Lightning flashed, illuminating Catherine's face. In that brief moment, Eli caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in her expression. "He never told me," she said quietly. Then again, we barely spoke in the last 20 years. May I ask why? Catherine was quiet for so long that Eli thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. He left us. Left my mother for a waitress at some roadside diner. Her laugh was bitter. Mother never recovered. She retreated into herself, became a ghost in our own home. I was 15. I'm sorry, Eli said simply. I built everything myself after that, Catherine continued, as if the words had been waiting years to come out. Made sure I would never need anyone. The parties, the social circle, the business success, it was all perfect and perfectly empty. She shook her head. Look at me, sitting here telling my life story to a man who's trying to take my inheritance. I'm not trying to take anything, Catherine. I never wanted. A deafening crack of thunder cut him off, followed by a tremendous boom that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Catherine gasped, instinctively reaching out and grabbing Eli's hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. Her fingers were cold against his warm skin. Neither of them moved to break the contact. The storm raged outside, but in the candlelit room, time seemed to stand still. They sat in silence, hands still joined, while the candles flickered and shadows danced across the walls of the old mansion. Morning sunlight pierced through the tattered clouds, casting golden rays across the wet grass of the Beaumont estate. The storm had left its mark. Fallen branches scattered across the lawn, leaves plastered to windows, and a portion of the weathered slate roof damaged near the east wing. Eli stood in the garden, assessing the damage with practiced eyes. His white t-shirt was already damp from the morning dew as he gathered tools from the gardener's shed. The old ladder creaked under his weight as he climbed carefully to inspect the loose shingles. From below, Lila's voice rang out clear and sweet. Look, Miss Catherine, the birds are coming back. Catherine, still in her silk robe, but surprisingly unbothered by the morning chill, held a paper bag of birdseed. Her usual perfectly coiffed hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her feet were clad in practical rubber boots, a sight that would have shocked the social circles of Savannah. Gently now, Catherine instructed, showing Lila how to scatter the seeds in wide, careful arcs. If you throw too much at once, you'll scare them away. Lila giggled as sparrows and cardinals hopped closer, pecking at the scattered feast. They're so pretty. Daddy, can you see them from up there? I sure can, sweetheart. Eli called down, hammering a loose shingle back into place. Those birds know where to find good people with kind hearts. Catherine's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. She watched Eli work, noting how naturally he moved, how capable his hands were with tools. It was so different from the contractors she usually hired. There was something honest about the way he approached every task. Martha appeared on the back porch, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies. My goodness, it's nice to hear children's laughter in these gardens again, she said, setting the tray on the wrought iron table. Reminds me of when you were little, Miss Catherine. Catherine's expression softened. I'd almost forgotten about feeding the birds with Father. She paused, watching Lila name each cardinal that landed nearby. He used to tell me they were nature's little messengers. All fixed up here, Eli announced, carefully descending the ladder. His shirt now had smudges of dirt and old roofing tar, but his smile was bright. Should hold strong through the next storm. Would you? Catherine hesitated, then continued with newfound resolution. Would you like to walk through the gardens? They're lovely after rain. Eli wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. Lila, honey, why don't you help Martha with those cookies while I clean up? Can I save some for the birds? Lila asked, already halfway to the porch. Those are for people, little miss. Martha chuckled, leading her inside. But we'll find something suitable for your feathered friends. 20 minutes later, Catherine led Eli along the winding garden paths. The morning sun had dried the flagstones, but droplets still clung to the roses and azaleas, sparkling like tiny crystals. Father planted these yellow roses for Mother, Catherine said, touching a rain-kissed petal. I used to think he'd forgotten all about them, but looking at these journals. She trailed off, lost in thought. Sometimes people keep caring long after others think they've stopped, Eli offered quietly. They walked in comfortable silence, passing beneath an arbor heavy with wisteria. Catherine stopped at a small stone bench. I feel different here now, she admitted, sitting down. Yesterday, baking cookies with Lila, and then last night during the storm, I haven't laughed like that in years. She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture. It's peaceful, isn't it? Even after all the chaos. Eli sat beside her, leaving respectful space between them. Peace has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. Inside the mansion, the change was palpable. The staff moved with lighter steps, and conversations flowed more freely. Even the ancient grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick more cheerfully. Sarah, the young maid, hummed as she dusted the library shelves. "It's like spring came early to this old house," she whispered to Martha as they crossed paths in the corridor. As evening approached, golden light filtered through the tall windows of the music room. Eli sat at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the sunset's warm glow. His fingers found the keys hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as he played a gentle melody. Catherine paused in the doorway, drawn by the music. The tune was simple but touched with a profound tenderness that made her chest tighten. She watched Eli's face as he played, seeing both love and loss in his expression. The last notes hung in the air like a remembered dream. Eli's hands stilled on the keys, but he didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew she was there, listening, sharing in this quiet moment as the day's light faded to dusk. Martha walked past with fresh linens, smiling to herself. The halls of the Beaumont mansion rang with music again, and somehow that made all the difference in the world. The peaceful morning shattered with the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the mansion's entrance, and Victor Beaumont emerged, his designer suit pristine despite the humid air. His thin lips curved into what might have passed for a smile as he straightened his silk tie. Martha opened the heavy oak door before he could knock. "Mr. Victor," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "We weren't expecting you today." "Just checking in on my dear cousin," Victor replied smoothly, sliding past her into the marble foyer. "Family duty, you understand." Catherine descended the grand staircase, her face brightening at the sight of her cousin. "Victor, what a lovely surprise." She embraced him warmly, missing the calculating look in his eyes. From the garden, the sound of hammering drifted through the open windows. Victor's eyebrows rose. "Ah, our new resident is making himself useful, I see." "Eli's fixing the roof damage from last night's storm," Catherine explained, leading Victor into the drawing room. "Would you like some coffee?" "Please." Victor settled into a leather armchair, his gaze sharp as he studied his cousin. "You seem different, Catherine, more relaxed. I trust Mr. Turner isn't taking advantage of your hospitality?" Catherine poured coffee from the silver service Martha had brought. "Actually, Eli has been quite—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Respectful." Victor accepted the delicate china cup. "You know how these things often go, dear cousin." A man of his background suddenly thrust into wealth? It changes people. "Eli isn't like that," Catherine said, but doubt flickered across her face. "Of course not," Victor soothed. "Still, it seems strange, doesn't it? Uncle Thomas, leaving everything to a virtual stranger?" He leaned forward, voice dropping conspiratorially. "Have you considered that perhaps Mr. Turner's presence in Thomas's final days might have influenced things?" Catherine's fingers tightened around her cup. "What do you mean?" "Well," Victor spread his hands. "A dying man, possibly confused, with this younger man always around, helping, being so very helpful. He let the implication hang in the air. Eli saved father's life in the war," Catherine reminded him, but her tone had lost its certainty. "Did he?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "Has anyone verified that story? War records can be complicated things." While Catherine sat in troubled silence, Victor excused himself to use the bathroom. Instead, he slipped into Thomas's study, quickly rifling through the desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old correspondence, he found what he was looking for: notes about an earlier draft of Thomas's will. Victor pulled out his phone and snapped photos of the documents, then sent them to a contact with the message: "Need convincing copies, rush job, usual rate plus 50%. Returning to the drawing room, he found Catherine staring out the window. Eli was visible in the garden, helping Lila collect fallen branches. The tenderness between father and daughter was obvious, even from a distance. "Such a touching scene," Victor commented, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But Catherine, dear, you must protect yourself. Your father's estate. It's your birthright. Don't let misplaced trust cloud your judgment. You think I'm being naive?" Catherine turned from the window, worry etched on her face. "I think," Victor said carefully, "that you've been through a terrible loss. It's natural to want to believe in people, But men like Turner, they see opportunity in others' vulnerability. Catherine sank into a chair. He seems so genuine. The best con men always do, Victor patted her hand. Just be careful. Watch him closely. I'm looking into some things, legal matters that might interest you. What things? Too early to say. Victor stood, straightening his jacket. But remember, Catherine, you're a Beaumont. Don't let anyone take advantage of that name. He moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and Catherine? His lips curved in a knowing smirk. Be careful whom you trust, dear cousin. Martha showed him out, her disapproving gaze following his Mercedes as it purred down the driveway. Through the window, she watched Catherine sink deeper into her chair, conflict evident in every line of her body. The peaceful morning was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of doubt. Inside his car, Victor pulled out his phone again. His contact had already replied, 2 days, perfect copies. Better have the cash ready. He smiled, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes as the mansion disappeared in his rearview mirror. The seeds of doubt were planted. Soon, they would bear bitter fruit. The late morning sun painted golden patterns across the mansion's sprawling lawn. Catherine stood on the back patio, smoothing her linen dress with nervous hands as she watched Martha pack a wicker basket with sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a pitcher of homemade lemonade. Are you sure about this, Miss Beaumont? Martha asked, her eyes twinkling. A picnic is rather informal for you. Catherine lifted her chin. Well, times change, don't they? She picked up a checkered blanket, the kind she would have dismissed as common just weeks ago. Besides, it's a perfect day for it. The sound of running feet made them both. A turn. Lila burst through the French doors, her braids bouncing. Miss Catherine, Daddy says we can come. She skipped over and tugged at Catherine's dress. Can I help carry something? May I? Catherine corrected automatically, but her smile was warm. She handed Lila a small bag of cookies. These are just your weight, dear. Eli appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain in his casual clothes. Catherine, you really don't have to go to all this trouble. Nonsense, she said, waving away his protest. When was the last time you had a proper picnic? She didn't wait for an answer, leading the way down the stone steps to the lawn. They settled under a massive oak tree, its branches creating a natural canopy. Martha had included a red and white checkered blanket that Catherine spread carefully on the grass. Lila immediately kicked off her shoes, wiggling her toes in the soft grass. Daddy, look! The clouds look like cotton candy. Lila flopped onto her back, pointing skyward. Eli stretched out beside his daughter, one arm behind his head. That one looks more like a rabbit to me. Catherine sat more primly, but found herself drawn into their game. The one to the left, she said hesitantly, reminds me of a sailing ship. You've been sailing? Lila sat up, fascinated. Once, long ago, Catherine poured lemonade into paper cups. Father took me when I was about your age. I was terrified at first, but then, she smiled at the memory. It felt like flying on water. They shared sandwiches and stories as the afternoon stretched lazy and golden around them. Lila told elaborate tales about her stuffed animals' adventures, while Eli shared funny stories from his time as an army medic, the gentle ones that made them laugh rather than hurt. I have something special, Catherine announced after they'd eaten. She reached into a bag and pulled out a diamond-shaped package wrapped in brown paper. I found this in the attic this morning. Lila's eyes widened as Catherine unwrapped a kite, faded but still beautiful, with a tail made of multicolored ribbons. It was mine when I was little, Catherine explained, her voice soft with memory. Father and I used to fly it right here on this lawn. Can we try? Lila bounced with excitement. I'm not sure I remember how, Catherine admitted. Eli stood up, brushing crumbs from his pants. Well, lucky for you ladies, I happen to be an expert kite engineer. He winked at Lila, who giggled. Together, they worked to get the kite ready. Catherine held the wooden frame while Eli checked the strings, showing Lila how to tie secure knots. Their fingers brushed occasionally, sending unexpected warmth through Catherine's hands. Now, the trick is to wait for just the right breeze, Eli explained, holding the kite up. Lila, you'll run with it while Catherine holds the string. Ready? Lila took off across the lawn, the kite bouncing behind her. Catherine let out the string carefully, just as she remembered her father teaching her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a gust of wind caught the kite, lifting it suddenly skyward. I did it, Lila squealed, running back to them. We all did it, Catherine corrected, her eyes following the dancing kite. The wind lifted it higher, the ribbon streaming like a rainbow against the blue sky. Something tight in her chest loosened as she watched it soar. "It's like freedom," she whispered, not meaning to say it aloud. Eli looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes the things that seem the simplest can give us the most joy." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Here she was, flying a kite with the man she'd once spat upon and his daughter, and feeling more content than she had in years. Lila tugged at her hand. "Your turn to run with it, Miss Catherine." Catherine hesitated only a moment before kicking off her shoes. The grass felt cool and alive between her toes as she ran, holding the kite high, her laughter joining Lila's in the summer air. Her hair came loose from its careful style, streaming behind her like the kite's ribbons. From the shelter of distant trees, a camera lens caught the scene in perfect detail. Catherine's unguarded joy, Eli's gentle smile, Lila's innocent delight. Victor Beaumont lowered his phone with a satisfied smirk, but none of the happy trio noticed his presence in their moment of pure joy. They flew the kite until the shadows grew long, and Martha rang the dinner bell. As they gathered their picnic things, Catherine noticed Lila yawning. "That was the best picnic ever," Lila declared sleepily, hugging Catherine's legs. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Mr. Green's downtown law office. His weathered hands trembled as he opened the plain brown envelope that had been slipped under his door sometime during the night. The paper inside felt wrong somehow, too crisp, too new. As he read the document, his face grew pale. It was a second will, dated just weeks before Thomas Beaumont's death, with language that explicitly revoked all previous versions. According to this document, the entire estate would pass directly to Catherine Beaumont. Mr. Green reached for his phone, his fingers hesitating over the keypad. He had known Thomas Beaumont for 30 years. Something about this didn't sit right, but the signatures and notary stamps looked legitimate. At the mansion, Catherine sat in the garden, watching Lila chase butterflies while Eli trimmed the rose bushes. The past few days had been peaceful, almost happy. Then her phone rang. "Catherine, you need to come to my office immediately." "Mr.?" Green's voice sounded strained. "There's been a development." Victor was already waiting in Mr. Green's office when Catherine arrived. His face showed concern, but something gleamed in his eyes. "Cousin, I'm so sorry you have to go through this," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Green cleared his throat. "This document was delivered to my office this morning." He slid the papers across his desk. "It appears to be a more recent will, signed and notarized just before your father's passing." Catherine's hand shook as she read, her face flushed with anger. "How dare he?" she whispered. "How dare Eli do this to me?" "Now, Catherine," Mr. Green cautioned. "We don't know." "Oh, but we do," Victor interrupted smoothly. "I've been looking into Mr. Turner's background. Did you know he visited your father several times in the months before his death? Always alone, always in private." Catherine's mind raced back to the peaceful moments of the past few days. The picnic, the laughter, Eli's gentle ways. Had it all been an act? "He manipulated Father," she said, her voice hardening. "Used his guilt about the war to trick him into that first will." Mr. Green frowned. "We should investigate this thoroughly before—" "I've seen enough," Catherine cut him off, standing abruptly. "That man and his daughter are living in my home, eating my food, playing me for a fool." She stormed out of the office. Victor following close behind with a concerned expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Rain had started to fall, matching Catherine's darkening mood. Back at the mansion, the staff had gathered in the kitchen for lunch. Eli sat with them, helping Lila with her sandwich, when Catherine burst through the door. Her hair was damp from the rain, her eyes wild with hurt and anger. "How long were you planning to keep up this charade?" she demanded, throwing the papers onto the kitchen table. They scattered, sliding across the wooden surface. Eli stood slowly, confusion written across his face. "What charade?" "This!" Catherine grabbed one of the papers, holding it up. "Father's real will. The one that proves you're nothing but a manipulative fraud." The kitchen staff froze. Martha dropped a plate, but nobody moved to clean up the pieces. "Catherine," Eli said softly, "I don't know what that paper says, but I never—" "Stop lying." Her voice cracked. "You visited him in secret, played on his guilt, made him change his will in your favor. And I almost fell for your act." Lila clutched her father's hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Daddy?" Eli knelt beside his daughter, speaking gently. "Go pack your backpack, sweetheart. We need to leave." "But Please, Lila." The little girl ran from the kitchen, sobbing. Martha moved to follow her, but Catherine's sharp voice stopped her. "Let her go. They've overstayed their welcome." Eli stood, facing Catherine. The hurt in his eyes was raw, genuine. "I never lied to you. I never wanted your father's money. I only wanted to honor his memory by stealing what's rightfully mine. The only thing I'm guilty of is believing we could be friends." Eli's voice was quiet, steady. "I'll pack our things." The rain fell harder as Eli carried their bags to his old truck. The staff watched from the windows, Martha wiping tears from her eyes. Lila hugged her stuffed rabbit close, hiccuping with sobs. Catherine stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as Eli helped Lila into the truck. He turned one last time, rain streaming down his face. "Your father wanted to heal what was broken," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't help make that happen." The truck's engine sputtered to life. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Catherine could see Lila's small hand pressed against the glass, waving goodbye to the life they'd almost had. Victor appeared beside Catherine, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "You did the right thing, cousin. You protected what's yours." But as the red taillights disappeared down the long driveway, the mansion felt colder than ever. The sound of the rain seemed to echo through empty rooms that had, just hours ago, been filled with warmth and possibility. The first rays of morning sunlight crept across the polished hardwood floors of the Beaumont mansion, casting long shadows through the empty halls that seemed to stretch on forever. The golden light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. But even the warmth of dawn couldn't chase away the chill that had settled over the grand house. Catherine stood at the massive bay window in the front parlor, her manicured fingers pressed against the cool glass as she watched Eli's weathered pickup truck disappear down the winding cobblestone driveway. The truck moved slowly, as if reluctant to leave, past the ancient magnolia trees that had witnessed generations of Beaumonts come and go. Little Lila's tear-streaked face was just visible through the passenger window, pressed against the glass like a small flower wilting in the morning light. Her tiny hand waved goodbye with the desperate hope of a child who believed in miracles, continuing to wave even as they turned the corner and vanished behind the curtain of moss-draped oaks that lined the estate's entrance. The mansion felt different already, not just quieter, but fundamentally altered, as if the very soul of the house had been torn away. The warmth that had slowly begun to fill these old rooms over the past weeks, creeping into corners that had been cold for decades, seemed to have drained away with their departure like water from a broken vessel. Catherine's reflection stared back at her from the window, ghostly and unfamiliar. For a moment, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. Her usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, escaping from its careful arrangement, and her pale blue eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from a sleepless night spent pacing the halls. The expensive silk of her morning robe hung loose around her thin frame, and without her usual armor of pearls and perfectly applied makeup, she looked older than her 62 years. The proud Southern belle, who had commanded respect in every social circle, seemed to have disappeared, leaving behind only a hollow shell of regret. "I hope you're satisfied with yourself, Miss Catherine." Martha's voice cut through the oppressive silence like a blade, sharp with a disappointment so profound it seemed to echo off the high ceilings. The old housekeeper stood in the arched doorway, her usually warm brown eyes blazing with an anger Catherine had never seen in 30 years of faithful service. Martha's arms were crossed over her chest, her sensible gray dress wrinkled as if she too had spent the night without rest, and her lined face was set in an expression of stern disapproval that would have made a lesser person shrink away. "They were taking advantage, Martha." Catherine's voice sounded weak even to her own ears, the words falling flat in the cavernous room. "Victor showed me proof. There was documentation, legal papers that clearly indicated—" "Victor?" Martha's laugh was bitter as winter wind, devoid of any warmth or humor. She stepped into the room, her sensible shoes clicking against the marble floor with each measured step. "That snake of a cousin who's been circling this estate like a vulture since before Mr. Thomas even took ill? The same Victor who couldn't be bothered to visit his uncle for 20 years, but suddenly appeared when he heard about the will?" She shook her head slowly, the gesture filled with profound sadness. "You've lost more than money today, Miss Catherine. Much. Much more than you can ever count or replace." Catherine lifted her chin in a gesture that had served her well in countless social battles, falling back on the familiar armor of pride that had protected her wounded heart for so many years. But the armor felt thin now, paper thin and ready to crumble. I did what needed to be done to protect this family's legacy. That man was clearly an imposter, using his little girl to play on our sympathies, to make us forget our better judgment. That man, Martha interrupted, her voice trembling with an emotion so deep it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Got down on his hands and knees last night to scrub the kitchen floor when he thought no one was watching, because little Tommy in the scullery was burning up with fever and couldn't do his duties. That man fixed Mrs. Peterson's leaking roof last weekend. She's been our cook for 20 years, and he'd only known her for a few days. He spent his own money on materials and worked through a rainstorm because he couldn't stand the thought of an elderly woman sleeping under a ceiling that dripped. Martha's voice cracked, and she wiped away an angry tear that traced a path down her weathered cheek. That man spent every evening after dinner reading stories to his little girl in voices that made her giggle, and when she had nightmares about her mama in heaven, he held her and sang lullabies until she fell back to sleep. That man was everything your father hoped and prayed you'd see when you looked past your own hurt and pride. The words hit Catherine like physical blows, each one finding its mark in the tender places of her heart she'd tried so hard to protect. But she held herself rigid, her spine straight as the marble columns that supported the mansion's grand portico. You don't understand the complexity of the situation, Martha. There was evidence, a second will that clearly showed— I understand plenty, Miss Catherine. Martha moved closer, closing the distance between them with determined steps, her eyes blazing with the fierce love of someone who had watched a child grow into a broken woman. I understand that when that precious child offered you wildflowers she'd picked from the garden, you smiled for the first time in years, a real smile, not the polite mask you wear to charity functions. I understand that when Mr. Eli played your father's old piano in the evenings, you stood outside that door like a lost soul, listening with your whole being, as if your heart was starving for something beautiful. She gestured with work-worn hands to the grand house around them, to the oil paintings and crystal chandeliers, the Persian rugs and gilded mirrors that spoke of generations of wealth and privilege. All this fortune, Miss Catherine, all these precious things your family has accumulated, and you're poorer now than you were yesterday morning, poorer than you've ever been in your entire life. Catherine turned away from Martha's penetrating gaze, but the housekeeper's words followed her like ghosts, haunting and inescapable. Your father knew exactly what he was doing when he chose Mr. Eli. He saw in that humble man everything that money can't buy and power can't command. Genuine kindness, true humility, grace that comes from suffering and still choosing to love. Martha's voice softened with memory. I watched your daddy's face light up whenever he talked about Mr. Eli. He said that man reminded him of what he'd lost somewhere along the way in building this empire. That's enough. Catherine's voice cracked like a whip, but the sound seemed to break something inside her, even as it left her lips. Her composure was fracturing, the careful control she'd maintained for decades beginning to crumble. You're dismissed for the day, Martha. I need to be alone. The housekeeper's footsteps paused at the threshold, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle with the love of someone who had rocked a frightened child through countless storms. You know where to find me when you're ready to hear the truth instead of what you want to believe, Miss Catherine. I've watched you grow up in this house from a sweet little girl into a proud woman. I've seen you build these walls around your heart, brick by brick, after every hurt and disappointment. Her voice carried the weight of decades of watching and waiting. But walls that keep pain out also keep love away, child. And love was standing right here in your living room, wearing a man's kind face and a little girl's trusting smile. The heavy oak door closed, softly behind her, the sound echoing through the vast space like a final punctuation mark on Catherine's choices. Catherine stood alone in the enormous room, dwarfed by the soaring ceilings and surrounded by the accumulated treasures of generations. Her father's portrait watched her from its place of honor above the marble fireplace, his painted eyes seeming to hold a mixture of disappointment and hope that made her chest ache with an almost physical pain. The silence pressed in around her from all sides, thick and suffocating, broken only by the steady, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. The same clock that had marked time for her entire life, that had witnessed her first steps, her childhood tears, her mother's funeral, and now this moment of devastating clarity. She found herself moving almost without conscious thought through the familiar hallways, past rooms filled with memories both bitter and sweet. Her bare feet whispered against the cool marble as she made her way to Thomas's study, the sanctuary where her father had spent his final years trying to make peace with his choices. The leather-bound journals still sat on his massive mahogany desk exactly where he'd left them, as if waiting for someone to discover the truth hidden in their pages. The morning light streamed through the tall windows behind the desk, casting everything in a golden glow that made the dust particles dance like prayers ascending to heaven. Sinking into his familiar leather chair, the same chair where he'd held her as a child while he worked, where he'd taught her to read by tracing letters with her small finger, Catherine opened the most recent volume with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. The pages fell open, as if guided by an unseen hand to an entry from just months before his death, the ink still dark against the cream-colored paper. Watched Eli today with his little girl at the Veterans Center downtown. The man has nothing to his name but gives everything he has to others who are struggling. I saw him slip $20, probably his last 20, into the donation box when he thought no one was looking, then spend the afternoon helping wheelchair-bound veterans feel useful again. Grace often wears the face of the man we least expect, arrives in the package we're too proud to open. I pray Catherine will see what I see in him, not a stranger taking what isn't his, but family coming home at last. Catherine's fingers traced the words slowly, feeling the indentations her father's fountain pen had left in the expensive paper. Each letter seemed to burn into her consciousness, carrying the weight of a dying man's deepest hopes. The morning light continued its journey across the study, illuminating the room where so many important decisions had been made, where her father had built his fortune and, in his final years, tried to build something far more valuable, a bridge between his mistakes and redemption. She sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been, while outside the tall windows, the garden that Eli had tended so carefully with his work-roughened hands bloomed in defiant beauty. The roses he'd pruned climbed toward the sun. The vegetable patch he'd planted for Martha's kitchen showed the first green shoots of new life. And the children's swing he'd hung from the old oak tree moved gently in the morning breeze. Already missing the sound of Lila's delighted laughter, the silence of the empty mansion pressed against her from all sides, and for the first time in years, Catherine Beaumont felt the true weight of her solitude, not the chosen isolation of wounded pride, but the devastating loneliness of a woman who had just discovered what love looked like, only to drive it away with her own two hands. 2 weeks after leaving the Beaumont mansion, the morning sun painted golden stripes across the worn linoleum floor of Eli and Lila's single-wide trailer. The familiar creaks and groans of their humble home welcomed them back like an old friend who had kept a light on, waiting for their return. Eli stood at the compact kitchen counter, carefully spreading peanut butter on wheat bread for Lila's lunch. His work-roughened hands moved with gentle precision, making sure to cut off the crust just the way she liked. The fresh bruises on his knuckles and the deep ache in his shoulders reminded him of yesterday's construction job. Hauling concrete blocks under the hot Georgia sun was a far cry from the climate-controlled comfort of Thomas's study. "Daddy, can I have the blue plate?" Lila called from their tiny dining nook, where she sat coloring with the stubby crayons she'd saved from their time at the mansion. "It makes everything taste better." "Sure thing, sweetheart." Eli reached for the chipped ceramic plate, one of the few they'd brought from their old life before the mansion. It wasn't fine china, but Lila treasured it all the same. The familiar routine of their mornings had settled back into place, though sometimes Lila would pause and look around as if searching for something or someone missing. She'd adapted to their return with the resilience of childhood, finding wonder in the smallest things. Just yesterday, she'd spent an hour collecting pine cones from their yard, declaring them nature's treasure boxes. "Look what I drew." Lila held up her latest artwork, a crayon picture of their trailer, surrounded by flowers that seemed to dance across the paper. "It's our castle." Eli smiled, noting how she'd drawn their home larger than life, with rainbow-colored windows and a garden that would make Eden jealous. "It's beautiful, princess. You've captured it perfectly." As he packed her lunchbox, Eli's gaze drifted to the window where the morning glory vines were starting to climb the lattice he'd built last spring. The simple beauty of their tiny garden couldn't compare to the manicured grounds of the Beaumont estate, but it was honest and true, like everything else in their life. "Time for school, sweetheart," he said, helping Lila gather her things. The local elementary was just a short walk down their quiet street, nothing like the private academy she'd briefly attended during their mansion stay. "Can we say our morning prayer first?" Lila asked, reaching for his hand. They bowed their heads together, a daily ritual that had carried them through the hardest times. Eli's voice was soft but steady as he prayed, "Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful morning and for all your blessings. Watch over Lila at school today. And Lord," he paused, his heart heavy with compassion, "please be with Miss Catherine. Help her find the peace that only you can give." Lila squeezed his hand. "Amen." After walking Lila to school, Eli headed to the construction site where he'd found work. The foreman had welcomed him back without questions, knowing Eli's reputation for honest labor. As he lifted boards and swung his hammer, the physical strain helped quiet his mind. During their lunch break, Eli sat in the shade of a half-finished wall, unwrapping his simple sandwich. Around him, other workers complained about the heat or shared jokes, but he ate in peaceful silence. His thoughts drifted to the elegant meals at the mansion, but there was satisfaction in earning every bite of his lunch through honest work. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they raised wall frames and secured joists. Eli's muscles protested each movement, but he welcomed the familiar ache. It was honest pain, earned through useful labor rather than emotional turmoil. When evening came, Eli picked up Lila from her after-school program. She skipped alongside him, chattering about her day, her small hand warm in his as they walked home. The setting sun painted their trailer in shades of pink and gold, making it look almost magical. "Daddy, look!" Lila pointed to a cardinal perched on their mailbox. "It's as red as Miss Catherine's fancy lipstick." Eli felt his heart twist at the innocent observation. "Yes, it is, sweetheart." Inside their trailer, they settled into their evening routine. Eli heated up simple soup while Lila set their small table, carefully placing their mismatched plates just so. The space was tight, but it was filled with love and the comfort of familiar things. After dinner, they sat on their tiny porch, where Eli had strung lights across the awning. Lila curled up in his lap with her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from Martha, the mansion's housekeeper, on their last day there. "The stars look prettier from here," Lila declared, gazing up at the night sky. "You can see them better than at the big house." Eli hugged her close, grateful for her ability to find joy in their circumstances. "That's right, baby. Sometimes the simplest views are the best ones." When bedtime came, Eli helped Lila into her pajamas and tucked her into the bottom bunk of their small bedroom. The top bunk remained empty, but neither mentioned it anymore. He read her favorite story, the pages worn from countless readings. As he finished the tale and kissed her forehead, Lila's sleepy voice caught him by surprise. "Do you think the sad lady misses us, Daddy?" The afternoon shadows stretched long across the Beaumont mansion's study as Catherine sat at her father's massive mahogany desk. Her fingers traced the worn leather chair arms where his hands had rested countless times. The house felt emptier than ever, despite the expensive furnishings and priceless artworks that adorned every wall. A gentle knock interrupted her brooding. Martha appeared at the door, her usual warm expression tight with concern. "Mr. Green is here to see you, Miss Catherine. He says it's urgent." Catherine straightened her silk blouse, composing herself. "Send him in, Martha." Mr. Green entered, his weathered face grave. His briefcase, usually kept pristinely closed, was stuffed with papers that threatened to spill out. He didn't wait for pleasantries. "Miss Beaumont, I've discovered something that will distress you greatly." He placed his briefcase on the desk with trembling hands. "But you need to know the truth." Catherine's throat tightened. "What is it, Harold?" The lawyer pulled out several documents, spreading them across the desk. His fingers, usually steady after decades of handling legal papers, shook slightly. "These are the original drafts of your father's will. Notice the watermarks, the paper quality." He then pulled out the second will, the one that had driven Eli away. "Now look at this." Catherine leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on her nose. At first glance, everything looked identical. But as Mr. Green pointed out subtle differences, her heart began to race. The letterhead is slightly off-center. The paper stock isn't quite right. But most damning of all, he pulled out a stack of bank statements and surveillance photos. "Your cousin Victor made several large withdrawals just before presenting this will, and these photos show him meeting with a known document forger in Charleston." The color drained from Catherine's face. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Are you saying the second will is a forgery, Miss Beaumont? Victor orchestrated this entire deception." Mr. Green's voice was gentle but firm. "He played on your doubts, your pain, to manipulate you into turning against Eli Turner." Catherine's hands flew to her mouth. The room seemed to spin as memories flooded back. Victor's subtle hints about Eli's character, his convenient discovery of the second will, the way he'd encouraged her suspicions. But most painfully, she remembered Eli's face when she'd accused him, the quiet dignity with which he'd accepted her cruel judgment. "There's more, mister," Green continued, pulling out another document. "Your father didn't just leave Eli his estate. He legally adopted him 3 months before his death." "What?" Catherine whispered. Thomas saw in Eli the son he wished he'd been, a man of integrity, compassion, and genuine humility. He wanted to make him not just his heir, but his family. Mr. Green's eyes softened. "Your father hoped this would heal old wounds, not create new ones." Catherine stood abruptly, walking to the large portrait of Thomas Beaumont that hung above the fireplace. His eyes seemed to look right through her, just as they had in life. All these weeks, she'd let her old hurts and pride blind her to what her father had tried to teach her. "I've already contacted the authorities about Victor's fraud." "Mister," Green said quietly, "but I thought you should know first. The original will stands. Everything your father wanted, everything he hoped for, it was all true." Catherine's fingers traced the frame of her father's portrait, remembering the journals she'd read, his words of regret and hope. She thought of Eli's kindness, despite her cruelty, of little Lila's innocent prayers for the sad lady upstairs. She'd had a chance at a real family, at healing, at love, and she'd thrown it away because of her wounded pride. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's not too late to make things right, mister," Green suggested gently, gathering his papers. "Eli Turner is a man of remarkable forgiveness. Your father saw that in him." But Catherine barely heard him. The weight of her actions crashed over her like a wave. She'd let her father down again, just as surely as if she'd torn up his last wishes herself. Her legs gave way, and she sank to her knees before the portrait, tears streaming down her face. "I failed you again," she whispered to her father's painted eyes. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the study windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. In the silence that followed, Catherine remained kneeling, her proud shoulders shaking with sobs as the full measure of her mistake washed over her. Morning sunlight filtered through the Spanish moss draped over Savannah's ancient oaks, casting dancing shadows across the cobblestone streets as Catherine's silver Mercedes glided down Abercorn Street. Her manicured fingers gripped the ivory steering wheel with such force that her knuckles had turned bone white, the tension radiating up her arms and settling like a stone in her chest. The familiar landmarks of her hometown, the ornate wrought iron gates of Forsyth Park, the towering cathedral spires, the grand antebellum mansions she'd admired since childhood, now held an entirely new meaning as her desperate eyes searched each street corner, each storefront, each shadowed doorway for any sign of Eli and Lila. The construction company where Eli had once worked stood wedged between a quaint coffee shop with hand-painted window signs and an old-fashioned hardware store that still displayed its wares in wooden bins. Catherine pulled her Mercedes into the gravel parking lot, the expensive car looking conspicuously out of place among the weathered pickup trucks and work vans. Her designer heels, cream-colored Louboutin pumps that cost more than most people's monthly rent, crunched uncertainly on the loose stones as she made her way across the uneven surface toward the modest office building. The heavy glass door bore the smudges and fingerprints of countless working hands. A small brass bell above the frame jingled cheerfully as Catherine entered, announcing her arrival to the cramped office beyond. The space smelled of coffee, sawdust, and honest labor scents that seemed foreign to someone who had spent her life in boardrooms and country clubs. A heavy-set man in a worn flannel shirt looked up from his cluttered desk, genuine surprise evident on his deeply weathered face. His work boots were scuffed and stained, his hands bearing the calluses of decades spent building things that mattered. "Well, Can I help you, ma'am?" Catherine smoothed the front of her silk blouse with nervous fingers, suddenly feeling oddly self-conscious in her expensive clothes. The contrast between her polished appearance and the humble surroundings made her feel like an actress who had wandered onto the wrong stage. "I'm looking for Eli Turner," she said, her voice smaller than intended. "He used to work here?" The man's weathered expression immediately softened at the mention of Eli's name, his eyes growing warm with unmistakable respect. "Eli? Now there's a good man, that one. Best worker I ever had the privilege to employ." He leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Haven't seen him on any jobs lately, though. Been wondering how he and that sweet little girl of his are getting along. He scratched his chin thoughtfully, studying Catherine with curious eyes. But if you're looking for him, I'd try the First Baptist Church downtown. He volunteers at their shelter most mornings, helping serve breakfast to folks who need it. Always said it was his way of giving back. Thank you, Catherine said quietly, her voice thick with emotions she couldn't quite name. The knowledge that Eli had been serving others while she wallowed in her mansion's emptiness cut deep. Ma'am, the man called after her as she turned toward the door. If you see him, would you tell him Joe says we could use his skills again anytime? And his kindness, too. Don't get many men like him in this world. Back in the sanctuary of her car, Catherine sat in the driver's seat for several long minutes, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. The paper bag on the passenger seat contained her humble peace offering chocolate chip cookies she'd spent half the night baking in the mansion's state-of-the-art kitchen, following the simple recipe Lila had taught her during those precious weeks that now felt like fragments from another lifetime. The cookies weren't perfect by any stretch of the perfect imagination. Some were slightly burned around the edges where she'd misjudged the oven's temperament. Others were a bit lopsided where she'd dropped dollops of dough with unsteady hands. But she'd refused Martha's gentle offers to help, insisting that this gesture, however flawed, had to come entirely from her own heart and hands. Each imperfect cookie represented something far more valuable than anything money could buy. Genuine remorse shaped by her own efforts. As she guided the Mercedes toward downtown Savannah, memories of the past weeks crashed over her like ocean waves. She could see Eli's quiet dignity as he faced her cruel words and cutting remarks, never once responding in kind. She remembered Lila's infectious, innocent joy that had somehow managed to penetrate the dark corners of the mansion where bitterness had lived for so many years. Most painfully, she recalled the way Eli had taught his daughter to face unkindness with grace and forgiveness, a profound lesson Catherine was only now beginning to comprehend. The busy streets of downtown Savannah unfolded before her as she passed Wright Square, where business people in crisp suits hurried along the sidewalks, clutching steaming coffee cups and checking their phones. A homeless man sat alone on a weathered park bench, his few possessions bundled beside him, and Catherine found herself wondering if Eli had helped this very man at the shelter. The thought of Eli, who could have been living in pampered luxury at the Beaumont mansion, choosing instead to spend his mornings serving society's forgotten souls, made her chest constrict with a shame so profound it was almost physical. At a red light, she caught her own reflection in the rearview mirror. The perfectly coiffed blonde hair that had been styled that morning by Savannah's most exclusive salon, the expertly applied makeup that had cost more than some families spent on groceries, none of it could hide the deep shadows under her eyes, or the worry lines that had etched themselves into her forehead over the past few sleepless nights. She'd rehearsed what to say countless times while pacing the empty halls of the mansion. Formal apologies delivered with appropriate dignity, carefully worded offers of financial restitution, measured explanations about Victor's elaborate deception and her own terrible blindness. But now, sitting in her car with a bag of imperfect homemade cookies, each practiced phrase felt as hollow as the mansion she'd left behind. I was wrong, she whispered to her reflection, testing these unfamiliar words on her tongue. They felt strange, almost foreign words she couldn't remember ever saying with genuine meaning. I was wrong about everything that matters. The First Baptist Church rose majestically before her, its pristine white spire reaching toward the clear morning sky like a finger pointing toward something far greater than earthly concerns. Catherine circled the block not once but 3 times, her courage failing catastrophically each time she approached the church parking lot. Her hands grew slicker on the steering wheel with each pass, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. On the 4th attempt, she finally forced herself to pull into the parking lot, choosing a spot near the back where her expensive car might attract less attention. The space was already busy with activity, old pickup trucks, modest sedans, and a few church vans that had clearly seen better days, but were maintained with loving care. She sat there with the engine idling, watching the steady stream of people coming and going through the side entrance where a hand-painted wooden sign read, Community Kitchen and Shelter, in cheerful blue letters. Some of those entering looked like they needed the services being offered men and women whose clothes had seen hard wear, whose faces bore the weight of difficult circumstances. Others were clearly volunteers, carrying boxes of donations or wearing bright aprons over their regular clothes. Her fingers brushed the paper bag of cookies again, the brown paper crinkled and warm from her nervous handling. Such a small, humble gesture to make up for such grievous wrongs. Such inadequate compensation for the pain she'd caused to a man who had shown her nothing but patience, and to a little girl whose only crime had been loving too freely. Martha's prophetic words echoed through her mind like a haunting melody. "You've lost more than money today, Miss Catherine. You've lost something worth far more than all your daddy's fortune." Indeed, she had lost something infinitely more precious than real estate or investments. She had lost the miraculous chance at redemption, at family, at experiencing the kind of love that asked for nothing in return and gave everything freely. The weight of her lifelong pride battled fiercely against the crushing tide of shame that threatened to drown her completely. Every instinct bred into her by decades of privilege and social position screamed at her to drive away, to preserve what remained of her dignity, to find some other way to make amends that didn't require this terrifying vulnerability. But stronger than pride, stronger even than shame, was the desperate hope that somehow, some way, grace might still be possible. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, Catherine finally switched off the engine. The sudden silence felt deafening after the comforting hum of the Mercedes. She reached for the paper bag with hands that trembled like autumn leaves, clutching it like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. This might very well be her last chance to make things right, her final opportunity to prove that Catherine Beaumont could be something more than the bitter, prideful woman she'd allowed herself to become. For perhaps the first time in her entire privileged life, she would have to set aside everything she thought she knew about herself and step into the terrifying, unknown territory of genuine humility. She opened the car door and stepped out onto the asphalt, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to judgment. Each step toward the church entrance felt simultaneously like the most terrifying journey of her life, and the first steps of a long overdue journey home. The late morning sun warmed the busy churchyard, where cheerful chatter and children's laughter filled the air. Colorful balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, tied to folding tables laden with baked goods and handmade crafts for the church's charity fair. At a small corner stand decorated with hand-drawn lemons, Eli and Lila Turner served cups of fresh lemonade. 2 quarters per cup, Lila announced proudly, her pigtails bouncing as she carefully arranged paper cups on their wooden table. She wore a yellow apron that Martha had sewn for her, now slightly stained with lemonade spots. Eli smiled as he stirred the pitcher, watching his daughter count change for an elderly couple. Despite everything that had happened at the mansion, Lila's spirit remained bright as sunshine. She had insisted they make extra lemonade today, saying she had a feeling more people would come. "Your daughter's quite the saleswoman," remarked Pastor Roberts, accepting a cup from Lila with a warm smile. "She gets that from her mother," Eli replied softly, adjusting the paper sign Lila had decorated with glitter. The memory of Anna brought warmth rather than pain now, a healing he hadn't expected to find. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned and conversations hushed. Eli looked up to see what had caught everyone's attention and froze. Catherine Beaumont stood at the church gate, clutching a paper bag to her chest. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual designer outfit, her silver hair caught in the breeze. Her face, usually masked with perfect makeup, showed every line of worry and sleepless nights. Lila tugged at Eli's sleeve. "Daddy, look, it's the sad lady." The churchyard fell silent as Catherine walked toward their stand, her heels clicking against the stone path. Some people whispered behind their hands, recognizing the wealthy Beaumont heir who had so publicly spurned Eli weeks ago. Catherine's hands trembled as she set her paper bag on a nearby table. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glistening, met Eli's steady gaze. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she slowly lowered herself to her knees on the stone path. "Miss Beaumont," Eli started, stepping forward with concern. "Please, you don't need to." "I do," Catherine interrupted, her voice breaking. "I do need to." She looked up at him, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I've spent my whole life looking down on others, thinking wealth made me better. My pride, my bitterness. They've poisoned everything good that came my way." The crowd gathered closer, forming a circle around them. Lila stepped out from behind the lemonade stand, her small face full of compassion. "I was cruel to you both," Catherine continued, her shoulders shaking. "I let my pain blind me to your goodness. I spat on your kindness and doubted your honor. Her voice caught. "I became everything my father regretted being." She turned to look at Lila, who stood watching with wide eyes. "Sweet child, I'm so sorry I hurt you that day at the funeral. You offered me nothing but innocence and love, and I repaid you with contempt." Lila stepped forward and touched Catherine's shoulder. "It's okay. I asked Jesus to help you not be sad anymore." Catherine's composure crumbled at the child's simple forgiveness. She covered her face with her hands, decades of carefully maintained dignity falling away. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, either of yours. The second will was forged, Victor's doing. I should have known better, should have trusted what I saw in your hearts instead of listening to lies." The paper bag she'd brought tipped over, and cookies, slightly burnt but carefully wrapped, spilled out. "I tried to make them, like you taught me, Lila. I wanted to bring something honest, something made with my own hands for once." Eli moved forward, his work-worn hands gentle as he helped Catherine to her feet. His voice was soft but carried clearly in the hushed churchyard. "You can't lose what was never yours to own, only what you refused to love." A ripple of quiet applause spread through the onlookers, accompanied by sniffs and murmurs of approval. Lila darted forward and wrapped her arms around Catherine's waist. "Does this mean you'll come to our lemonade stand again?" Catherine let out a watery laugh, her hand automatically smoothing Lila's hair. "If you'll have me. 2 quarters per cup," Lila said solemnly, then broke into a grin. "But since you're family, maybe we can make it 1/4. The tension broke as people chuckled, and the normal buzz of conversation gradually resumed. Catherine wiped her eyes with a handkerchief Eli offered, looking simultaneously drained and lighter than she had in years. "Your father would be proud of you today," Eli said quietly. "Why?" Catherine asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Because," he smiled, "you chose love over pride. That's what he wanted most for you." The morning sun continued to warm the churchyard as Lila pulled Catherine behind their stand, showing her the proper way to pour lemonade. The little girl's chatter mixed with the sounds of the fair, creating a melody of healing and hope. The evening sun cast long shadows across the church's fellowship hall as volunteers bustled about, preparing for the shelter's dinner service. The old building hummed with quiet purpose, volunteers checking warming trays, arranging plastic chairs around mismatched tables, and filling water pitchers from the ancient kitchen sink. The familiar scent of homemade rolls and beef stew filled the air, a comfort that spoke of countless meals served with love. Catherine stood awkwardly in the doorway, still wearing her designer dress that seemed wildly out of place among the practical clothes of the other helpers. The navy silk that had cost more than some people made in a month now felt like a costume from another life. Her pearl earrings caught the fluorescent light as she shifted nervously, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Here, Martha, who had come along to support her, handed her a plain white apron with gentle understanding. The older woman's eyes held no judgment, only the patient kindness she'd shown Catherine since childhood. "This will help protect your clothes, honey." Catherine fingered the cotton fabric, remembering how she'd once sneered at such common things. The rough texture, the simple ties, the lack of any designer label. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, warning her never to lower herself to such menial work. Now, she tied it around her waist with trembling fingers, the simple act feeling like the first honest thing she'd done in years. Eli appeared beside her, rolling up his sleeves with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. His movements were sure in practice, no wasted motion. "The serving line starts here," he said gently, his voice carrying that same calm reassurance she'd come to recognize. "Would you like to help with the mashed potatoes? They're usually pretty forgiving for beginners." She nodded, unable to find words past the lump in her throat. The kindness in his suggestion, acknowledging her inexperience without making her feel foolish, nearly undid her composure entirely. He showed her how to properly portion the food, his hands steady and sure as he demonstrated the right-size scoop, how to avoid drips, how to keep the serving area clean. The first guests began filing in, men and women of all ages, some in worn military jackets that had seen better decades, others in whatever clothes they could find or had been given. "Evening, Doc?" called out a gray-haired man with a slight limp, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. The nickname came so naturally, Catherine realized this wasn't just charity work for Eli. These people were his community, his extended family. "Who's your new helper?" "This is Catherine." Eli answered warmly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She's joining us tonight." The man tipped an imaginary hat with old-fashioned courtesy. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. I'm Jack. Served with your father in Desert Storm, actually." "Fine soldier, that one." Catherine nearly dropped her serving spoon, the metal clattering against the edge of the pan. You knew my father?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sure did. He'd come down here sometimes, real quiet-like. Didn't want anyone knowing who he was, just another face in the crowd." Jack's eyes crinkled with fond memory. "Just sat and talked with us old soldiers." He understood what it meant to carry memories that weigh heavy on your heart. As she served, more veterans shared stories that painted a picture of her father she'd never known existed. Each scoop of potatoes came with another revelation, another glimpse into Thomas Beaumont's secret life of service. A woman named Sarah spoke of how Thomas had secretly paid for her daughter's college after her husband died in combat, appearing as an anonymous benefactor when hope seemed lost. Another man mentioned receiving mysterious help with medical bills that had threatened to bankrupt his family, help that Catherine now realized must have come from her father's quiet generosity. The stories kept coming, each one chipping away at the bitter image she'd carried for so long. Her father hadn't just abandoned his family for a life of selfish pleasure. He'd been building bridges, healing wounds, carrying burdens that weren't his own. Eli worked steadily beside her, greeting each person by name, asking about their families, their health, their struggles with the genuine interest of someone who truly cared. He remembered everything. Who needed extra portions because they were sharing with a friend who was diabetic and needed to watch the dessert table. Who was looking for work and might benefit from a connection. It wasn't charity in the cold, distant way Catherine had always imagined. It was community, family, love in action. "Your daddy?" Martha whispered as she passed by with more rolls, her voice soft with memory. He saw something special in Eli, the same heart for service, the same quiet way of helping without making folks feel small about needing help. Lila flitted between tables like a small angel, offering water and napkins, her small face bright with purpose and joy. The guests treated her like a beloved grandchild, and she knew many of their names too, asking about grandchildren, remembering favorite foods, bringing light to faces that had seen too much darkness. During a quiet moment between dinner rushes, Catherine slipped away to Mr. Green, who had also come to help and was currently organizing donated winter coats. "I need you to arrange something," she murmured, explaining her plan for an anonymous donation to repair the shelter's leaking roof and aging kitchen equipment that clearly struggled to keep up with demand. "Of course," he replied with a knowing smile that reminded her so much of her father. "Your father would be proud, Catherine." This is exactly what he hoped would happen. When she returned to the serving line, a young veteran with haunted eyes and hands that shook slightly approached. He couldn't meet her gaze as he held out his plate, his shoulders hunched as if expecting rejection or judgment. "James," Eli said softly, recognition and warmth filling his voice. "How are the nightmares lately?" "Better, Doc. Those breathing exercises you taught me, they help when I wake up in a cold sweat." The young man's voice was barely audible. "Some nights I actually sleep through till morning now." Catherine watched as Eli reached across the counter to squeeze the young man's shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about their relationship. No words needed, just understanding, acceptance, and the promise that someone cared whether he made it through another day. She thought of her father's journals, of his own battles with trauma after the war, the sleepless nights and sudden startles he'd written about, and suddenly understood why he'd chosen Eli as his heir. It wasn't about money or property. It was about continuing a legacy of healing and hope, of one wounded soul helping others find their way home. The evening wore on, and Catherine's feet ached in her expensive shoes that had never been designed for standing on concrete floors, but she didn't want to stop. Each scoop of food, each smile exchanged, each heartfelt thank you received, it all felt like small steps toward redemption, toward becoming the person her father had somehow seen she could be. As the crowd thinned and the dinner service wound down, she noticed Eli organizing a small group of veterans in a corner. They sat in a circle on folding chairs, talking quietly about their struggles and victories, their voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. It wasn't formal therapy, just brothers and sisters in arms supporting each other through another day. Catherine remembered her father writing about such circles in his journals, how sometimes the best medicine was simply being heard, being seen, being known. Martha touched her arm with gentle pressure. "Come help me with the dishes, honey. Let them have their time. That's sacred space they're sharing." In the kitchen, Catherine plunged her manicured hands into soapy water without hesitation, watching her expensive nail polish chip against the rough edges of serving pans. "I've been such a fool," she said softly, her voice thick with regret. We all have our moments of blindness, Martha replied, her hands gentle as she dried the dishes Catherine washed. The important thing is opening our eyes before it's too late to see what really matters. Later, as they were cleaning up the last of the tables and stacking chairs for the night, Lila came skipping over. Her small face was tired but glowing with the kind of joy that comes from a day well spent. She threw her arms around Catherine's waist without hesitation, not caring about getting her apron dirty or crossing invisible social boundaries. I'm glad you're not sad anymore, Lila said, looking up with those clear, honest eyes that only children possess, eyes that saw straight through to the heart of things. Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks as she hugged the little girl back, this precious child who had somehow seen past all her walls to the wounded woman beneath. Me too, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice breaking with gratitude. Me too. A month had passed since the church fair, and autumn painted the Beaumont estate in warm hues of red and gold. The wrought iron gates creaked open as Catherine watched Eli's pickup truck wind its way up the long driveway. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy as she smoothed her simple cotton dress, so different from the designer wear she once insisted upon. Lila bounced out of the truck before it fully stopped, her backpack swinging wildly as she ran up the mansion steps. Miss Catherine! We're home! The little girl threw her arms around Catherine's waist, and Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she hugged back. Welcome home, sweetheart, she whispered, catching Eli's gentle smile as he carried their bags up the steps. The old house seemed to breathe with new life, its windows gleaming in the morning sun after weeks of cleaning and preparation. I hope you don't mind, Catherine said, leading them inside, but I had Martha help me prepare your rooms differently. This time, she opened the door to what had once been the formal sitting room, now transformed into a warm family space with comfortable furniture and Lila's artwork already framed on the walls. You kept my drawings? Lila gasped, running to touch the simple frames. Every single one, Catherine nodded. They reminded me of what really matters. Eli set down their bags, taking in the changes throughout the house. Gone were the stuffy antiques and cold formality. Instead, the mansion radiated warmth and welcome. Family photos, including ones of Anna that Catherine had carefully tracked down, lined the hallway walls. There's more, Catherine said, leading them to Thomas's old study. She'd transformed it into an office space with 3 desks, one for each of them. I've been working with Mr. Green to establish the Beaumont Foundation for Veterans and Families. She pulled out a folder of papers. We'll need a director who understands both the military and family needs. She looked meaningfully at Eli. Catherine, Eli started, but she held up her hand. Please, let me finish. This isn't charity, Eli. This is partnership. What my father saw in you, what I finally see now, is exactly what this foundation needs. Your compassion, your understanding, your strength. She touched the foundation's logo on the folder, a tree with spreading branches. We can help so many people together. Lila wandered over to the large windows overlooking the back garden, where workers were setting up tables and chairs. What's all that for? Catherine smiled. Our first fundraising event is next week. We're hosting a dinner for local veterans and their families. She turned to Eli. Several of your friends from the shelter have already agreed to help coordinate future projects. Eli walked to the desk, running his fingers over the smooth wood. Your father would be proud of this, Catherine. This is exactly the kind of legacy he hoped for. Our legacy now, she corrected him, as family. They spent the afternoon touring the renovated mansion. The ballroom had been converted into a multi-purpose space for community events. Several guest rooms were being outfitted as temporary housing for veterans in transition. The kitchen had been expanded to accommodate cooking classes and meal preparation for local shelters. Martha appeared with lemonade and cookies, made from Lila's recipe, as they settled on the back patio. The old housekeeper's eyes shone with happiness, seeing the 3 of them together again. Oh, Catherine suddenly remembered something. I have one more surprise. She led them to the front yard, where a young oak sapling waited in a large pot, ready for planting. I thought, maybe we could plant it together? For Thomas and Anna? Eli's eyes softened with emotion. He picked up a shovel while Catherine and Lila gathered gardening tools. Together, they prepared the soil in a spot where the tree would be visible from both the street and the house. As they worked, Lila sang a hymn she'd learned at church, her sweet voice carrying across the lawn. Other staff members paused in their work to watch as the unlikely family planted their tree of remembrance. "The roots will grow deep," Eli said, patting the soil around the base. "Just like the roots your father put down here, Catherine. And like the ones we're putting down now." Catherine reached for both their hands, Eli's strong, work-roughened one, and Lila's small, dirt-smudged fingers. "I never understood what Daddy meant about making a house a home," she said softly. "I thought it was about the things we owned, the image we presented." She squeezed their hands. "But it's this. It's family. It's love." They stood together, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the sapling's leaves. The tree might have been small, but like the foundation they were building, like the family they were becoming, it would grow stronger with each passing season. Martha called them in for dinner, and as they walked back to the house, Lila, skipping between them, Catherine caught Eli's eye. The mansion behind them no longer felt like a monument to wealth and status. Instead, it had become exactly what Thomas Beaumont had hoped for, a place of second chances, of healing, of grace. Spring burst into Savannah like a painter's masterpiece, bringing with it new life to the Beaumont estate. The mansion's windows sparkled in the morning sun, reflecting the vibrant azaleas and dogwoods that dotted the carefully tended gardens. Where once stood an imposing symbol of wealth and isolation, now thrived a place of warmth and purpose. Inside the grand foyer, veterans and their families mingled with social workers and volunteers. The sound of laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence for so many years. Martha, still the faithful housekeeper but now more family than employee, directed a group of volunteers arranging chairs for the afternoon support group meeting. "Miss Catherine," Martha called out, a smile crinkling her eyes, "those flowers you ordered for the memorial garden just arrived." Catherine looked up from her clipboard, her once perfect coiffure now simply tied back in a practical bun. "Thank you, Martha. Would you mind asking Jeff from landscaping to help place them?" Her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by genuine warmth. In the library, now converted into a counseling center, Eli sat with a young veteran, listening intently as the man shared his struggles with PTSD. Eli's quiet strength and understanding created a safe space for healing, the same kind of healing Thomas Beaumont had once offered him. "Some days are harder than others," Eli was saying, "but you're not alone in this journey." His worn hands, calloused from years of work, rested comfortably on the arms of his chair. He wore simple clothes, unchanged by his position as the foundation's director, authentic as ever. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 4, and Eli smiled. "Excuse me," he said to the veteran, "but I have a very important appointment with a young lady." Right on cue, the front door burst open, and Lila's voice rang through the house. "Grandma Cat! I got an A on my history project." Catherine emerged from her office, arms open wide as Lila ran to embrace her. The little girl's backpack bounced against her as she jumped into Catherine's arms. Who would have thought that the woman who once spat at a stranger would now be kneeling on the floor, covered in glitter from a child's art project? "Show me everything, sweetheart," Catherine said, leading Lila to the kitchen where cookies and milk awaited, a ritual they'd developed over the past months. As they settled at the kitchen island, Lila pulled out her project, a family tree that included not only Eli and her late mother Anna, but also branched out to include Grandma Cat and even Thomas Beaumont. Catherine's eyes misted as she traced the carefully drawn lines connecting them all. "Your daddy helped you with this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the careful penmanship on the dates. "Uh-huh. He said family isn't just about blood, it's about love." Lila dunked her cookie in milk, leaving crumbs floating on the surface. "Like how you're my grandma now, even though you're not really my grandma." Catherine pulled Lila close, breathing in the scent of playground dust and sunshine in her hair. "Oh, but I am really your grandma. Love makes it real." Later that evening, after the day's visitors had gone and the support groups had ended, Eli found Catherine in Thomas's old study, now her office. She sat in the leather chair, reviewing plans for the foundation's anniversary celebration. "Lila's asleep," he said, settling into the chair across from her. She insisted on reading an extra chapter of her bedtime story. Catherine smiled, remembering how she'd taught Lila to love reading during those first tentative days of bed. Their reconciliation. "She's growing so fast." "Just like the foundation," Eli agreed, gesturing to the architectural plans spread across the desk. The blueprint showed expansions for new counseling rooms and a larger community space. "Do you ever wonder what Thomas would think of all this?" Catherine asked, her voice soft with reflection. Eli considered for a moment, his eyes drifting to Thomas's portrait on the wall. I think he'd be proud, not of the buildings or programs, but of you, Catherine, of how you've grown. Catherine touched the journal that still sat on her desk, her father's words now a source of comfort rather than pain. I was so angry for so long. But he knew, didn't he? He knew exactly what I needed, what we all needed. A chance to heal, Eli nodded, to become family. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Martha bringing in their evening tea, another ritual they developed. The old housekeeper set down the tray with knowing eyes, having watched their relationship evolve from hostility to deep familial love. The doves arrive for tomorrow's ceremony, Martha reported. They're beautiful creatures. Catherine reached for her tea, the china cup no longer a symbol of status but of comfort. Perfect. I want tomorrow to be special, not just a celebration of the Foundation's work, but of forgiveness, of second chances. Eli raised his cup in agreement. To second chances. As they sat together in the warmth of the study, the mansion seemed to breathe with contentment. Through the window, spring flowers nodded in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the garden, a mockingbird sang its evening song. Tomorrow would bring the anniversary celebration, but tonight was for quiet gratitude, for the unexpected ways love could heal and family could grow. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the lawn filled with people gathering for the Foundation's first anniversary celebration. Tables decorated with fresh flowers dotted the grass, and a podium stood ready near Thomas's memorial garden. White doves cooed softly in their release boxes, waiting for their moment to soar. The evening sun painted Thomas Beaumont's study in warm amber light, casting long shadows across the Persian rug that had graced this room for 3 generations. Catherine sat in her father's old leather chair, the one that had molded itself to his form over decades of late-night business dealings and quiet contemplation. She ran her fingers along the worn armrests, feeling the smooth depressions where his hands had rested countless times. The burgundy leather was soft as silk now, polished by years of use and memory. The room still held his presence in every carefully chosen detail, in the precise arrangement of leather-bound books that lined the mahogany shelves, in the faint scent of his favorite pipe tobacco that had seeped into the heavy velvet curtains over the years. In the careful way everything had its designated place. Even the brass letter opener lay exactly where he'd always kept it, beside the crystal inkwell that had belonged to his own father. Catherine had been avoiding this room since returning to the mansion 6 months ago. Too many memories live within these walls, both bitter and sweet. But tonight, something had drawn her here. Perhaps it was the laughter echoing from the garden below, or the way the evening light reminded her of childhood afternoons spent reading in the window seat while her father worked at his desk. She opened the bottom drawer of his massive oak desk, the one she'd avoided since his passing. The brass handle was cool beneath her palm, and the drawer slid open with the same soft whisper it had made throughout her childhood. Inside, beneath a carefully arranged stack of old sepia photographs and yellowed business papers tied with ribbon, she found a cream-colored envelope that made her breath catch in her throat. Her heart skipped when she saw the handwriting, her father's elegant script, flowing across the envelope in the distinctive Palmer method he'd learned as a boy. The ink was slightly faded, suggesting the letter had been written some time ago. Both her name and Eli's were written there in his careful penmanship, joined by a simple "and" that somehow carried the weight of prophecy. My dearest Catherine and Eli, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper in the hushed sanctuary of the study. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal, noting how her father had pressed his signet ring deep into the burgundy wax. The paper inside was thick, quality stationery her father had always preferred, heavy cream stock with his monogram embossed at the top. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases with the reverence one might show a sacred text. If you're reading this, the letter began in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. Then something remarkable has happened. You found each other, just as I prayed you would every night since I learned the truth about what family really means. Catherine blinked back tears, remembering how fiercely she'd fought against that very thing, how she'd built walls of pride and resentment so high that she'd nearly lost the greatest gift her father had tried to give her. Through the tall study window, she could see Eli pushing Lila on the garden swing he'd built just last week. The little girl's delighted squeals mixed with his deeper laughter, the sound drifting up through the open window and carried by the evening breeze that rustled the ancient magnolia tree. Catherine, my precious daughter, she continued reading, her father's voice seeming to speak directly to her heart. I failed you in so many ways that I've lost count of my regrets. Pride was my cardinal sin, the same destructive pride I saw reflected in you like a mirror I couldn't bear to look into. It cost me precious years with you and your dear mother, years I can never reclaim. But God, in His infinite mercy, gives second chances to those willing to learn from their mistakes and humble themselves before His grace. She paused, dabbing her eyes with the lace handkerchief she always kept tucked in her sleeve. Below in the garden, Layla had jumped off the swing with the fearless abandon of childhood and was now chasing butterflies among the rose bushes while Eli watched from a nearby bench. His smile was gentle and patient, the same expression he wore when reading her bedtime stories or helping her with the wildflower garden they'd planted together. And Eli, the letter continued, Thomas's words flowing like a benediction. You showed me what I should have been all along, what a real man looks like when he's not blinded by the false gods of wealth and status. When you pulled me from that burning vehicle in Afghanistan, you didn't pause to ask if I deserved saving. You simply acted with the kind of selfless courage I'd forgotten existed. When I found you years later, struggling after Anna's death, battling to provide for little Lila while your own heart was breaking, you didn't ask for help, but you accepted it with a grace that taught me more about dignity than all my business successes ever could. Catherine's vision blurred as she read, the words swimming on the page like reflections on water. She remembered her first cruel words to Eli at the funeral, how she'd spat at him in front of everyone, calling him trash. The memory burned like acid in her chest, yet he'd responded with nothing but kindness, even when leaving the mansion after her accusations had cut him to the bone. My greatest hope, Thomas's letter continued, each word carefully chosen, was that you two would heal each other's wounded places. Catherine, you needed to learn that love isn't something earned through perfection or purchased with pretty gestures. It's given freely, like grace itself. Eli, you needed to accept that receiving gifts doesn't diminish your worth or make you less of a man. You've both known loss that would break lesser souls. Together, you're the living legacy of my second chance, the family I should have been brave enough to build myself if I hadn't been such a fool about what really matters. The sound of Martha calling everyone for dinner echoed through the house, her voice warm with the authority of someone who'd been keeping this family fed for decades. Catherine stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to the tall window that overlooked the garden. Eli was now helping Lila collect flowers for the dinner table, showing her with infinite patience how to avoid the thorns on the prize rose bushes that had been her grandmother's pride and joy. I leave you, not just my earthly wealth. She read the final paragraphs, her voice growing stronger as her father's wisdom washed over her. But something far more precious, my hard-earned wisdom. Family isn't about blood or social status or the size of your bank account. It's about the conscious choice to love without conditions, to forgive without keeping score, and to see the divine spark in each other's broken and beautiful places. Take care of each other the way I should have taken care of those I loved. Let little Lila's innocent heart be your compass. She sees clearly what we adults so often miss. And remember, my dear ones, that it's never too late for grace to make something beautiful from our worst mistakes. The letter was signed simply, in the flowing script she remembered from birthday cards and school notes. With eternal love and gratitude, Thomas. Catherine walked slowly to her father's portrait above the marble fireplace, her steps silent on the thick rug. The stern businessman she'd known in her youth, dull, sharp angles and calculating eyes, had softened considerably in his final years. Now she understood why. The man in the painting looked almost peaceful, as if he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all his life. Now I understand, Daddy, she whispered to the portrait, her voice thick with a lifetime of emotions finally finding their way to the surface. You didn't just leave us wealth, you left us the chance to love each other. You left us hope. Through the window, she watched as Eli and Lila headed toward the house, their arms overflowing with fresh-picked flowers, daffodils and tulips and early roses that would grace Martha's dinner table. The setting sun caught the leaves of the old magnolia tree, its golden light spilling through the branches like liquid honey, blessing the three of them as they walked together. A family reborn through grace, bound not by blood or obligation, but by the conscious choice to love despite their wounds. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.